The stars shimmered with cold indifference as the last of Earth's orbital defense platforms flickered and died. General Vexon watched in silence from the bridge of his flagship, the Eviscerator, his fingers resting on the hilt of a ceremonial blade that had not been drawn in centuries. Around him, the control deck pulsed with soft, deliberate movements, Krell officers clicking commands in their serpentine tongue, luminous scales dimmed to a war-hardened sheen. Earth had disappointed him. He had expected more than a planet whose last defenses crumbled like ash. A signal interrupted his thoughts. "Transmission from Earth Command," announced Subcommander Thrall, tilting his head in deference. The screen flared to life, revealing a war room carved in steel and silence. 12 human generals sat around a table shaped like a broken spear. At first, Vexon thought the figure standing behind them was a standard-bearer. But as the camera sharpened, he saw the cloak, a tattered American flag. The woman beneath it wore a skin-tight combat suit glinting red and black beneath flickering fluorescence. Her arms were crossed. Her face was expressionless. She stepped forward, her voice like gravel dragged across polished stone. "You forgot rule number 1. The screen cut to black. For a moment, silence returned. Then Vexon said, "Begin descent. I will accept their surrender personally." Beneath the surface of the Rocky Mountains, Fort Sentinel thrummed with the restrained chaos of war readiness. Concrete hallways echoed with bootfalls and coded warnings. General Marcus Rourke stood at the heart of the storm, eyes narrowed at a holographic display of Earth's dwindling global infrastructure. He was 60, but his posture betrayed no weakness. Every scar on his face had a classified origin. Every movement had the finality of command. "Vexon is coming down," said Colonel Isaac Dempsey, arms folded across a worn tactical vest. "I assume you have a reason for not evacuating." Rourke didn't look up. "We want them to think they've already won." Dempsey didn't bother asking what happened during the broadcast. He already knew. He had felt the temperature shift when she stepped into the room. "Where is she?" he asked. "Prep chamber," said Rourke. Dempsey shook his head slowly. "She's not a soldier, Marcus. She's a loaded gun with no safety. She's the reason we still have a bargaining chip. You're gambling with what's left of our command structure." "I'm not gambling," said Rourke. "I'm setting the board." Down in the isolation wing, Riley Shaw sat on the bench of an empty locker room, peeling back the reinforced gloves of her suit. The flag-stitched cloak pooled behind her like blood on marble. Her breathing was calm, methodical. Above her, digital readouts buzzed with security metrics and atmospheric anomalies. None of them mattered. She had memorized the entire base structure years ago. A technician approached with hesitation. He held a data slate in trembling hands. "They want you upstairs," he said, eyes locked on the floor. Riley took the slate, glanced once at the contents: alien movement trajectories, heat signatures, psychological risk profiles, and dropped it on the bench. "They're late," she said. She walked without sound. The base seemed to part for her presence. Technicians fumbled with consoles. Medics turned aside. Even the soldiers, battle-hardened veterans of the Martian insurgencies and Jovian sieges, looked at her like something half-whispered in their sleep. She entered the war room just as the Krell delegation descended into Fort Sentinel's primary bay. The alien envoys slithered with rigid grace, their armor bone-dark and segmented like the husk of some ancient predator. They radiated confidence, the kind born not of arrogance, but of historical certainty. No species had ever stopped the Krell once they began planetary integration. They didn't conquer with numbers. They conquered with inevitability. Vexon stepped into the chamber like a judge entering a condemned village. His eyes swept the human command staff. He paused only when he saw her. "This is your final line of resistance?" he asked, voice like rusted iron. Rourke's mouth twitched upward. "This is a courtesy." Vexon's gaze shifted back to Riley. "You declared yourself the apex predator of Earth." "No," she replied. "You asked who it was. And you answered with posturing. I answered with honesty. Vexon took a step forward. I've studied your species. You are fractured, petty, short-lived. Your wars are aimless, your victories pyrrhic. You are not predators. You are parasites. Riley moved. Just one step. But the motion changed the room. Then why do you fear us? She asked. I do not. Yes, you do. Because you've already broken our walls, but you can't tell if we've let you in or lured you here. A silence fell over the room, taut and buzzing. Even the soldiers at the walls dared not speak. Later, when the Krell were escorted to temporary holding quarters beneath the base, Dempsey caught up to her near the elevator shaft. You didn't kill anyone, he said. That's progress. I wasn't paid to kill, she replied. We don't pay you at all. She tilted her head. Then you got one hell of a bargain. He watched her step into the elevator and disappear behind the doors. Rourke joined him moments later, watching the descending level light blink out. She's bait, Dempsey muttered. You're throwing a loaded gun into a room and praying the safety holds. There's no safety, Rourke said. That's the point. When the base's lights flickered 2 hours later, no one panicked. Fort Sentinel ran drills daily. But when the alarms tripped a second time, when the AI failed to respond, and when the comms turned to static, the command staff realized something had gone wrong. Thatcher, the systems engineer, slammed his palms on the console. They breached through the diplomatic protocol. The Krell seeded malware into the environmental systems. Lock down, Rourke ordered. Where's Riley? She left her tracker behind, Thatcher said. Of course she had. In the surveillance grid, they found scattered fragments. A Krell scout team, 6 of their elite, had peeled off their diplomatic disguise and begun moving through the base. Hunting. But something was wrong. One feed showed them hesitating. Another caught the tail end of panic. One of the warriors slumped against the wall, armor melted from the inside. Play that back, Dempsey said. They did. But the figure was too fast. A flicker, a blur of cloak and crimson light. She's already in play, Rourke said. In the hangar, Vexon stepped over the corpse of one of his own. He snarled something in Krell. The reply came broken and garbled, panic in a language not built to express it. Then the lights cut completely. The sound of breathing filled the hallway. Breathing that wasn't Krell. You forgot rule number 1, came the whisper. And then silence. Back in the war room, Dempsey looked at Rourke. She's hunting them. No, Rourke said. She's reminding them what it feels like to be prey. Above them, the earth trembled with fire. But below, in the dark, the last weapon Earth had ever built was teaching the Krell the one lesson they had never learned: fear. The bodies they found were not just dead, they were undone. Krell warriors, bred for conquest and fear, lay scattered through Fort Sentinel like broken icons. Armor cleaved at the seams. Helmets torn from within. There were no signs of gunfire. No blood trails. Just silence, and dread clawing up the walls. General Marcus Rourke stood in the command bunker, watching static-ridden surveillance feeds flicker through ghostly glimpses. One showed a flash of red. Another caught the tail of a cloak vanishing down an emergency shaft. His lips pressed into a grim line. "She's her own kind of war," he murmured. Colonel Isaac Dempsey flanked him, fingers tightening around the receiver pressed to his ear. "Thermal just went dead in Reactor Sector 4. Vexon is down there. So are 3 of ours. No signal. No life signs." Rourke nodded slowly. "Then she's close." The command room went still. Above them, the alien fleet hung like a noose. Most of the human satellites had gone dark in the first volley. Earth's defenses had always been symbolic, deterrence with teeth blunted by treaties and bureaucracy. Now, as the Krell vanguard pressed its boots to the soil, symbolism meant nothing. In the silence, Thatcher's voice cracked through the comms. "I've rerouted power to Sector 5's internal grid. Might buy her a few minutes of light. No guarantees." Dempsey glanced sideways. "And if the Krell follow the cables back to the source?" Thatcher shrugged. Then I hope our boogeyman has a few more nightmares left in her. Somewhere beyond their view, Riley Shaw moved like a fault line through the dark. She no longer cared for their cameras. The base layout unfolded in her mind with clinical clarity: vents, crawlspaces, choke points. Her suit absorbed every vibration, her heartbeat barely registered. She had trained for this. Not war. Not assassination. But this precise moment: total dissection of an invading force from within. The Krell had not adapted. They had evolved along predictable lines: mass, intimidation, strength. But they had never encountered Riley before. She moved through Sector 4 with her body low and her breath even. Krell footsteps echoed around her, heavy and unhurried. Predators certain of their dominance. She let them hear something, a faint metallic scrape, just enough to turn their heads. Then she melted into the shadows behind them. The first fell without a sound. His spinal joint collapsed with one motion, his weapon stolen before he hit the floor. The second panicked and fired. The blast punched a hole in the corridor wall, but struck nothing. The third never even saw her. When the smoke cleared, Riley left them in a neat triangle. No theatrics. Just a message. Elsewhere, Vexon stood alone in the central cooling vault. The hum of fusion cores filled the space with vibrating menace. He stared at the holographic schematics hovering before him, primitive human engineering, but effective. His claws moved across the controls, decrypting locks, disabling failsafe. He was close. Once the coolant lines were ruptured, the meltdown would collapse Fort Sentinel from the inside. Then he paused. Something tugged at the edges of his instincts. Not sight. Not sound. Just presence. "You could have left," said a voice. He turned. Riley stood at the threshold of the vault, arms at her sides, the cloak barely swaying. Her eyes held no fear. "You came to kill me," he said. "I came to remind you what you forgot," she replied. "Rule number 1. You are one weapon," he growled. "We are a Dominion." "You're a symptom," she said. "And I'm the cure." He lunged. Fast, faster than anything his bulk suggested. But Riley had already stepped aside. The impact cracked the wall. Sparks cascaded behind her as she twisted, struck his temple, and rolled clear. Her movements weren't military. They were surgical. Vexon recovered and activated his retractable blade. Riley ducked under the slash, drove a small device into his left flank, and rolled again. The device pulsed once, an electromagnetic disruptor keyed to Krell neural pathways. He screamed. Not from pain, but from the disorientation that followed. She didn't hesitate. They fought like two ideologies locked in bone and fury. Vexon used brute force. Riley used pressure points, momentum, and angles honed by thousands of simulations, and failures she had long since memorized. She drew blood, broke bone. He cracked ribs, tore fabric, shattered concrete. They were both wounded when the final blow landed. Riley feinted left, drew him toward a coolant pipe, and detonated the thermal charge she had planted there hours earlier. The blast threw them apart. Steam roared through the vault as alarms blared. When Vexon rose again, he stumbled. Smoke spilled from the left side of his armor. Riley approached, limping slightly, blood trickling from her lip. "This isn't over," he said. "Oh," she smiled faintly, "it really is." She pressed her palm against the vault override. The ceiling retracted, revealing the tethered escape pod used for emergency exfiltration. Vexon turned, too slow. Riley struck again, this time with the hilt of her weapon. He crumpled into the harness. She sealed the pod with her retinal code. "Enjoy the ride," she whispered. The pod launched through the roof like a bullet, breaking through the rock and flame, headed directly into orbit. On the surface, the Krell fleet received the emergency beacon. Inside the pod, Vexon's image flickered onto their screens. But there were no words. No orders. Just his face. Battered. Broken. The Krell hesitated. And then Earth's counterstrike launched. The hidden platforms beneath the Atlantic rose from the sea like sleeping gods. Arctic silos opened with thunder. Lasers burst through the ionosphere. For the first time, Earth was not defending, it was responding. Back at Fort Sentinel, Thatcher wiped sweat from his forehead as data rolled in. Multiple retreat signals detected. Their fleets breaking orbit. Dempsey stared at the screen. She did it. Rourke nodded slowly. No. She reminded them. Down in the debris-filled corridor outside the vault, Riley collapsed against the wall. She closed her eyes. The pain was real. The fatigue undeniable. But so was the peace. She had done her part. Later, when the fires cooled and the bodies were counted, she emerged from the depths of Fort Sentinel like a phantom fading back into legend. On her desk, Dempsey found a single file. Boogeyman Protocol, Phase 2. He opened it. Inside was a single phrase. Rule number 1 was just the beginning. He looked up as a transport roared into the sky, headed somewhere unlisted. Riley Shaw was already gone. But the galaxy had learned something it would never forget. Never ask Earth who its apex predator is. Unless you're ready to meet her.